Good morning, everyone. It is September 22nd, and we are beginning our third session together of the life class. We're so pleased that you're here, and we are sort of continuing our introduction to complex trauma and how this has affected us in life, how it's affected our biology. Um, I don't know how many times you may hear the phrase, let's get on with it. I'm ready to just get on with it. Um, I'm impatient, and you'll feel that within yourself this morning if you haven't already. I want to do something new. It reminds me of that old Wendy's hamburger commercial where the lady is there and she goes, "Where's the beef? Where's the beef? I want to get to the substance." And you're just vibrating with impatience. Let's get to the point. Get to the point. Well, one thing that I have found in my life, maybe you have in yours, if you've ever like gotten something at Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, and just ripped open that box, thrown the directions to the side, and just crammed it all together. So, it's going to work. It's going to work. And it doesn't. And you've had to go through the painful experiences over several years. You mean I have to read the directions? You mean I have to understand basically how these things work? Well, that is a horrible to learn. And many of us never learned it in life. So just a couple more sessions, hang in here with me as I explain the mechanics and some of the basics developments. For example, you may want me to talk about how I can fix this right now and make somebody think and behave how I want, or how I get up in the morning and be all joyful and cheery and not have these depressing, rat trap thoughts. Okay, that's going to come. But first, we need to go back and think maybe as how we felt as a child. Maybe think about how a child things. So if you feel this raging impatience, I just want you to know I get it. And I hope you come back the next. That's really, really normal. We left off last week talking about how our wounds affect how we think about ourselves. And certainly our wounds, early childhood wounds, affect how we cope. They affect our relationships today, even though we may be totally unaware of those things. They can be subconscious. They affect how we see the world. So the reality is we all have those, as we know. And wounds are designed to heal. We watch those as our animals get wounded. We take them to the vet. We watch little things, maybe not close up. I know things don't heal as fast on me as they did when I was in my 40s, but with patience, they do heal. But the challenge of trauma that when you're a child, we're in a situation to where that wound doesn't heal. And last week I saw most of you gave a lot of very fervent nods when I said, you've heard people say, oh, children are resilient, they'll get over it. And just about everybody in this room went, no, they don't. And I just had this feeling that I was with a group of people who really knew the truth. You were not the mass herds out there who were misinformed. You'd been through something. So we're talking about wounds that don't heal. I mentioned Dr. Gabor Mate from Vancouver, and he's one of the leading researchers on trauma, author of many books, but When the Body Says No, which is a book you may want to get and look at, and part of my research, and also Dr. Tim Fletcher, who created this entire healing program and course, and you're going to be seeing him on video and well acquainted with him throughout the coming weeks. But one of his quotes I like is, "This trauma is an injury an inner injury, a lasting rupture, or a split within the self due to difficult or hurtful events. So, in other words, something happens out there. Doesn't have to be a big something. There's something that happens out there, and something splits in here because something gets injured. And so there have to be some changes. Well, what if nothing changes and you're a little kid and you're powerless and it just stays the way that it is and there's no place to go? So those are just events, but the actual trauma is the thing that happens inside you or inside me. So we usually just think of the experience. We don't think about what might have happened in our brain. I remember, goodness, it was at least 25, 26 years ago, looking at PET scans of my own brain and a normal brain, my own brain, a normal brain, brains of others with one of my trainers, and I was absolutely amazed to see, wow, this is all really true. This is really, really true. I had red flashing abnormal things in my brain, and so did other people who had had similar experiences. So not everybody comes out with trauma that has had something significant to happen. And the reason is, number one, they didn't have the tools to handle that event. And two, they didn't have the support around them. Maybe everybody was like really, really busy. Maybe they were ill-equipped themselves. So perhaps our only way of coping was, as you had on your original handout, there's 4 different ways. There's fight, flight, freeze, or what's called a fawn response. And we'll get into those more later. So these injuries sort of just stay here and become our maladaptive ways of coping through life. And you may not know which one yours is, but you may be familiar with feelings in your body that correspond to one or more of those. So, little t trauma, that's what we're going to be talking about in here. And it's usually a relationship type of trauma within an intimate type of relationship. Happens within families, within schools, within churches, within organizations. It's kind of a little psychic injury, little chronic things that deeply affect our nervous system. And then it comes in, as Dr. Mattei says, into our bodies and into our minds. And it goes on long past the original event. And this is not just childhood stuff. I know that particularly in like a long marriage or a long divorce, I know in my own story, this played on childhood events, but you can have chronic trauma within that or within a relationship that certainly does the same thing. So you can see this with things called triggers. A little something will happen that will remind maybe your partner or a family member of something, and it may not even be visible at all. And they will absolutely go ballistic. And you will think, what in the world? I was barely in the room. I don't remember saying anything. I don't remember anything going in the day that went wrong. But they absolutely had to come apart. They absolutely exploded. And you can't even trace it back to anything in the environment. later on, if you're fortunate enough to have a relationship that allows you to sort of take that back, sort of like pulling up a weed and tracing it back to the root, you will find that it has its origins in something that was fairly traumatic. Particularly in second marriages, you will find this, or second coupleships, you will find that maybe this has happened in the first coupleship and then is an echo of something that is in childhood. So wounds that we never really think about, we just sort of like tuck them away, and that we diminish or that we minimize. And often until we're triggered and we have this reaction, it is only then that we realize maybe we've been medicating this, diminishing this for a long time. But evidently that's not the case. I know I've had many where I've had that experience myself, and I'm going, woo, that is still raw. That is still extremely sensitive. And maybe I have been walking around absolutely making sure that nobody ever touches me in that place. I have arranged my life through my own vigilance to make sure I am never in that situation. I don't ever want to bump into anything. So if I'm honest, I look at how I have arranged my life and not been flexible to life. Let's say I have made sure that I'm never by myself in a certain situation, or I'm never in a big crowd, or I'm never with this type of person, whatever it might be. So because it's still open, it's still sensitive. Also, we can develop scar tissue. Scar tissue, as you know, is really, really tough. Any of you that have ever had surgery, you have to go to PT, they want you to keep moving that area. They just put the fear into you that's like, oh, if you develop scar tissue, you will never be able to move your joint again. I know I had double knee surgery replacements about 8 years ago, and many of you went through that with me, and they would just say, do you want to walk again? You've got to move those knees and keep moving those knees, and they really scare you to death with that. So it's very restrictive. Our lives kind of go into a funnel if we cannot remain open to life, if we get so self-protective and say those vows, I will never be in this position again. So whether it's open and sensitive, whether it's scar tissue, both restrict us. So our wounds ultimately restrict or constrict us as individuals. So the main point is to understand that it can make us less human, less flexible, less open to life. It hardens our heart. And we're just not free to be all that we should be. We're not totally free to keep growing as individuals. One of the things that I have had occur to me, a phrase that I've had occur to me numerous times about this case with many different people, it is as though they are frozen in time. Just frozen in time. And really in working with people with their dreams, they will often dream that they are in a freezer or emerging from a freezer. It's kind of interesting. And that's a tragedy of trauma, is its restrictiveness. I mentioned to you all last time that we are eventually going to cover 60 different characteristics of little t trauma. And these are things today that we can identify, and we can look at their negative side because they're little things that pull us down. And then we're going to look at the 60 things we can do as their antidotes. That's the meat in the hamburger. That's the stuff. That's the stuff that we want to get to and focus on. So, again, about that question. Well, that's in the past. Why do I need to work on it? Well, the answer is, I don't think any of us would be in this room if we didn't have something that's still affecting us negatively on a daily basis, whether we sail along blissfully for 6 months and then we have that trigger, or we face New Year's Eve and we write down those same things on our goal list. We don't tell anybody because they might hold us accountable, but there it is again. Or somebody says to us, ooh, are you still thinking you might want to get help with that? And you just resent the heck out of them, but you know it's still there. So what the end result of beginning to practice some of the things that we will look at together is that just like the butterfly that's encased in the cocoon, same process of transformation, the restrictions begin to be taken away, and the growth naturally will happen. Doesn't matter what you've been through, doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter. And I've watched it, I watch it daily. It's one of the most beautiful things I have a privilege of being a part of. I want to talk about the fact that, like with everything else, it's not a black and white issue. I think out of fear, often we think, oh, I'm here or I'm here. Moderate, mild. There's a spectrum of trauma. It's mild chronic. It's just sort of like if you let the water drip just a little bit at a time, and how it wears on us just a little bit at a time. That's kind of what we're talking about. And so many people would say, I've never had any of these things happen to me, so I don't have any of this, but I can think of several friends, and I'm going to be, going to get information to help them. And that's wonderful. That's one of the purposes of this class. But if you begin to really look at, this is about being human and having the chronic stuff of life, even if it's the fact that we are exposed to severe trauma just visually every day in the news and in our own city. We don't realize the collective impact that that has on us. So I think it's going to be an interesting ride going through a lot of this together. In terms of science, and many of you already know this, but I think it's helpful to review, the body will emit two chemicals when it is in extreme danger. There is cortisol, which is number one, and then it releases adrenaline, and that's what gives you the energy to fight or flight. We got to get out of here. We got to fight this thing. That's our only way of survival. I remember a little personal story. I think I was 15, and we were at dinner. Our family was at dinner, and my sister said, I smell smoke, and we ran outside, and the entire top of our home was just absolutely on fire. And so, of course, the fire department was on the way, and we were on one of the highest hills in West Meade. So people were already coming to gather from everywhere. And I remember my dad said, go next door and get the fire extinguisher. So I ran through the path to the next door neighbors, the Hughes' house. And I was just, frantic. There was a path through the woods. My heart was beating so fast, and I could feel, all of this adrenaline. I could just go back to it in a minute. My legs were pumping and all this kind of stuff. And so I asked for the fire extinguisher in the back door. And so when he came out, it was, I don't know, it might have been from the 1920s or something. It was this huge steel thing covered with rust. And he was an older man. He goes, well, here you go. This is it. And at first I had a thought, wow, how am I going to get that? My adrenaline was so high, I just picked that thing up and went across the path. I mean, I have no idea how much that it weighed, but later on, I remembered it clanking against my legs. My legs were black for weeks. Who knows? But we are capable of just almost superhuman things when we have that level of fear. My only thought was, have to save the house, have to save the family. It just happens. And many of you have many of your own stories like that. So that's what a chemical will do. And then we have oxytocin. And so this is certainly when we fall in love, when we're bonding, when we birth. Any of you who have given birth, we certainly know that there is such a difference between the process of labor and then that release of birth and then that little baby that has caused us more pain than imaginable, rip us apart, think we're going to die, does that smile and the oxytocin comes, you just like forget all about it and it's just a whole new day, or the process of breastfeeding. Many of those things are where oxytocin comes in. One of the things that I found so interesting in research is that when we haven't been securely attached to our parents, which would have been another normal flow of oxytocin, that when we get into our first romantic relationships or boy-girl kind of stuff, it is kind of like a whole new discovery of oxytocin. So we're much more likely to fall in love so easily. I'm not saying that leads to early promiscuity necessarily, but it's just, we just sort of go wild with it. And I think that's interesting. So with the oxytocin, then the baby cries because the baby wants mom and dad. And when the baby gets old enough to walk, if he or she can walk, the baby runs to go look for them. So normally when the parent hears the child's cry, oxytocin is released in the parent's brain. And they want to run and go hug the child and comfort the child and support the child. So it's for a child who does not yet have natural strength, the oxytocin is released in the child to say, run to someone with strength and then get someone to come and help you. But let's say that in that child's home, there's not anybody to come and help them. Let's say they're really busy and child's little, they can't drive, daddy's drunk, mommy's busy, mommy's on Valium, whatever's going on. And when daddy drinks, he comes out with a belt. And so they have cortisol now. Big drip of cortisol. They can't run, they can't fight. So the cortisol is not any good. Here comes the oxytocin again. They want to run for help, but nobody's going to help them. None of these are working. No good cortisol, no good oxytocin. What do? So we get a third chemical coming in, opioids. What do opioids do? Let's get ready for pain. I'm going to release opioids into the body so you don't feel pain. So what happens with cortisol? When cortisol is released, it sends blood into all the muscles. So you have extra strength to fight or flight. So when opioids are released, all the blood comes out of your extremities and then it comes in around the heart. And it basically says, I'm getting ready to get hurt or to get cut. So we don't bleed to death. We're going to center all the blood around the heart. And we're going to release pain-deadening medication, opiates that are naturally made, so we don't feel pain. So if you've ever had a freeze response when you're a child or as an adult, that's how that works. So I remember about 20 years ago going to my first seminar on cutting and why in the world would an adolescent do cutting and having this explained. And I remembered that I would always wonder why certain people would smile when they hurt themselves. And it made total sense. Total sense that that was their relief. It's just, I don't want to dwell on this, but you think about why we think fentanyl is such a big thing for people from childhood trauma. I mean, because their body's already been releasing opioids for so long, it can't get relief, and then they find something like that. So you think about it, that makes sense. Like, it would just be like, oh my goodness gracious, this takes me to this incredible pain-free place that I've never found on earth before. And they're just trying to get themselves out of pain. Not bad people, they're just trying to get themselves out of pain. So that's big T trauma. Let's go back to little t. And I think that most people would say, well, stuff that happened to me shouldn't have bothered me. That wasn't such a big deal. Other people have it worse than me. Why are we still talking about this? Why am I even complaining about this? Well, in a home environment, it's not really so much about bad things happening. It's about what should have happened that didn't happen. About good things not happening. About what should have happened and didn't happen. About the unconditional love and acceptance and respect in somebody understanding us, seeing us for who we were. And it is amazing how rare that will happen. We found out through science that the effect of the big T trauma is very similar to the effect of little t trauma. When we look at the brain, it changes the brain in the same ways, it affects the brain in the same ways. And that's very hard to believe. But if you have a very sensitive child, if you have a sensitive person, we tend to lay down that in very much the same way. But different children, you might have a brother. I know two brothers. One, the older one, just gave it right back to the dad, didn't seem to be affected at all. The younger one, tremendously affected. Tremendously. He's pretty much isolated his life where he doesn't leave his room. But with help, he's going to be getting a lot better. But he's basically, the last 10 years, lived in a little microcosm because of his fear. So we're going to be looking in the following months at trauma from about 50 different angles. I mentioned those 60 characteristics we're going to become familiar with, and this will give you a great education about people and about why people do the things that they do. We've talked about the 12 needs that every person has built into them, and I'm going to give you all a new handout. I've got some of the new material that I think says it a lot better than perhaps my original one. So if these 12 needs aren't consistently met, the child experiences neglect. Now, we're really good in our society about practical stuff. You know, we've got this money, got private schools, got stuff, dollars up. Then you think about the rise of social media. You think about the fact that everything goes so much faster. My sister and I would joke, probably starting 10 years ago. I remember one day she called me, and she's been a therapist a long time, and she said, "Ann, did you ever think that we would see the day when somebody would call, they would pay good money, and then at the end of the session, they would say, 'Beth, you have just reminded me of the importance of eye contact.'" And then we would both laugh hysterically, as though something so basic was the highlight of the session. The importance of eye contact, when with us it was such a given, but that the parent would feel like that was the diamond or the gem of that very expensive hour. So often, if a child has a need that can't be met, but they can't resolve it, we naturally have an inability to resolve a problem that's hurtful, and nobody's going to meet that need. So we ask somebody. And here are some things that can happen. We might get criticized. We might get punished. We might get told we're weak. We might get told to quit being a baby. So we might try to adapt. We might wear a mask. We might try to be a people pleaser. We might try to be a perfectionist. And then maybe somebody will meet my need, and then nobody does. So they try, and the need doesn't get met. And now what happens is they don't feel safe. And they have emotional pain. And it hurts. And the child doesn't like not having their need not met. And there's something in them that is not happy about this. There's a discontent. There's a pain. Now, all of this can happen very subconsciously in the child, but it's happening deep within. And so this is the wound that develops. You know, I just think of it as a great chronic sort of a powerlessness. And often, too, there are a lot of us, particularly I think in the South, where it was just sort of a forbidden that we don't tell the family secrets, or, you know, how often do I hear, you know, the parents will be deacons or sing in the choir, and there's sort of this church front. In the meantime, all this is going on at home. But with a child, they feel like it must be their fault that they're not good enough, must not be lovable enough. So this is sort of the birth of a negative self-identity starts to come out. So with these 12 needs not being consistently met, either because the parents didn't have the skills, didn't have the tools, or maybe they were too busy, they may have had their own issues, all kinds of different possible reasons. The child then lives with pain they cannot resolve. And then they don't feel safe. Because if nobody's meeting my needs, I feel all alone. I feel like nobody cares. So sorry. And so now it's just me against this big, bad world. Think about that. If I'm going to trust anybody, I am only going to trust myself. You see how that is so entirely opposite of an open heart connection, or what God would will for us, how we were originally created to respond, and yet this happens so often. Nobody seems to be helping here, so I feel very scared, I feel very unsafe. And so you see, with emotions, instead of the intended joy and the love of life and that beautiful little innocence that maybe just a few years before that baby is born, and in those early years, what is the emotion that begins to harden and become hardwired? Anybody have a guess? That's great, because that's really the same thing as fear, right? Fear. I have for you another handout, which is a great little tool. We have become an emotionally illiterate society because nobody wants to talk about their feelings. We've been told not to talk about our feelings. I think one of the greatest things is to identify our feelings, because that is, talk about something that can quickly get to the beef or get to the answer, is that if we will not skip the step of identifying our feelings, we can get to almost instant relief. It's just crazy. So I have for you all here the feelings wheel. So on one side, it's when your feelings are met, and then on the other side is the feelings when your needs are not met. So you can look at your 12 basic needs, okay, and then when those aren't met, look over here. When they are met, look over here, and things really start to make sense. Also, I have noticed that some of the most educated, adept people, even at the top of their profession, I've done like a management retreat or whatever for the organization, and come to the point after giving them some personality assessments, asking a simple question, what is your feeling when you close your eyes and look within? Okay, that's a fair question, right? After we've spent 2 days, going over some things about the dynamics of their teamwork, their cooperation level, only to have that person say, I don't want to talk about it. That's as far as I go. Or they've closed their eyes for about 3 seconds and go, bad, it's all dark. I can't tell you how many times that happens. There's a total wall and an unwillingness to even look at this subject. So it tells you how defended and cut off that most people are. It's been referred to often as a bridge of concrete right here. And that is why even in our breathing, it's reflected that if you will pay attention to your own breath or breath of others, people breathe from right here. So I think one thing in the class, and if you all are interested, I'll be happy to put a little bit more time into some breath training, which also is just one of those wonderful things that begins to open you up to awareness and to be able to calm down your parasympathetic nervous system to get you in touch with calm and what peace might feel like. Believe it or not, your own self and your own body is one of the greatest sources of comfort and not discomfort as you might believe. Most of us spend our lives trying to run from our own body and the feelings that it produces because of some of this early wounding and the thoughts that it produces. We have so much pain within us. So learning how to relax and generate peace within our own bodies without medication, without having to rely on other people, places, and events to try to be just the way we want them to be, is a process that may take some time. Let me skip ahead here. Peter Levine, who is a long time lecturer on little t trauma and on exercises and things that can help us, says trauma is about a loss of connection to ourselves, to our families, the world around us. And this loss is hard to recognize because it happens so slowly over time. We adapt to these subtle changes, sometimes without even noticing them. And that's why most people don't detect it until their lives are in shambles. Your lives may be great. You may have no changes to make, but I guarantee you may have family members. You may know someone. You may be praying for someone where this information could make you so much more compassionate towards them. So let me end today with a reading that I think you will appreciate. I had mentioned a couple of weeks ago that there are things from wisdom literature and also from scripture that I think are written to inspire and to encourage us, to give us a future and to give us a hope that we can read in the literal sense, but that we can also read in the symbolic sense. And there is one that I would like to present to you all and kind of teach you how to read it in the symbolic sense that I think may give you hope and renew your sense of purpose. This is one that is historically factual in terms of its documentation. You know, in the Bible, there is the Old Testament and there is the New Testament. And so in the 2nd century before Christ was born, there lived a prophet, Isaiah, and his recorded words were found in the Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found and proved to be authentic. And I'll read you the words of Isaiah. In Isaiah 42. Take a good look at my servant. I'm backing him to the hilt. He's the one I chose. I couldn't be more pleased with him. I've bathed him with my spirit, my life. He'll set everything right among the nations. He won't call attention to what he does with loud speeches or gaudy parades. He won't brush aside the bruised and hurt. And he won't disregard the small and insignificant. But he'll steadily and firmly set things right. He won't tire out and quit. He won't be stopped until he's finished his work to set things right on earth. Far-flung ocean islands wait expectantly for his teaching. Right, so there's many ways that you can interpret this. It's been said that he had a prophetic message about the coming of Christ. That is one way. There are many other ways to look at this. You can read this during the week, and you can think about whether this is the spirit of love. You can think about whether this might be how healing happens. You can think about how God works. There are many, many ways to take this, okay? So, I'm not judge or jury on how you interpret this. There are many, many writings about that. The interesting thing is that I'm going to turn on the back. I won't read the whole thing. But in the New Testament, 200 years later, in the book of Luke, chapter 4, verse 18, when Jesus was in the temple, he unrolled the scroll, and he found that place where it was written, God's Spirit is on me. He's chosen me to preach the message of good news to the poor. He sent me to announce pardon to prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the burdened and battered free, to announce, this is God's time to shine. And my point is that every one of you can take these words and personalize those words in your own life. Because through the trauma of being burdened and of being battered, as we all have, this is a time for truth to begin to shine through your life from that bottom up, from all those childhood experiences. And God is for you, and God is with you in your reading, in your prayers, in each one of these lessons. Every day, every moment. You don't have to even believe that. There are many of us in here who will believe it for you if you have no faith. And as I've said before, this is not a class that tries to prescribe your faith or even insist that you have a faith. It's just simply the way that it is. If you do the right thing, if you begin to open your heart to the fact that if you look at this and you begin to admit the possibility that developmentally you may have some things you need to take a look at, and that there are tools that can help you heal, I think wonderful things are ahead for you. So, blessings on each of you, and we'll welcome you back next week for the 4th lesson. I'm going to turn this off now.